So just to repeat a little bit, when we talk about what we're doing here, we're not using the conventional understanding and definitions of the word school and education, which typically tie directly back to academics and some kind of very specific intellectual progress on a child's behalf. Along that line, we definitely have that concern and recognize the need that our children have to be educated in academic matters and subjects. So there's nothing being left behind there. But what we further recognize from a cultural perspective is that, let me add that the American family has become very, very isolated and individualized, even within the arenas of public education. We have begun to feel that the family environment and the influence on the family environment should not be touched by, spoken of, or entered into by anyone else around us, because that's our sacred place. And, something that the Lord has revealed through us, and sometimes through very difficult circumstances, sometimes through mistakes in parenting and with children, that's not a good way to raise our children. And it's not because of any specific thing necessarily, but because something's been lost there in terms of how God wants his people to know one another, to experience his life in and through one another, and to learn of his wisdom through the context of the greater picture of what family is in God's sight. And so most of what we are doing in an attempt to begin to practically work out, I've through the years, many times people have asked me, or have had discussions about, the things that the Lord has revealed to us about the kingdom and God's people and his purposes. And, I've had people very specifically ask, well, how does that work out in everyday life? What does that mean that I do tomorrow? And, the days of go to the meeting and this teaching, those have their place and their purpose. But what we want to develop as a family of God is a greater context. Something that we've struggled with for many years is how to include our children in that. And, without having this blind expectation that at some point in their adolescence or adulthood that they will somehow automatically jump on board with us,
Yeah.
and because there's such a separation. And so I say that to quell the spiritual resistance that is there in each one of us and as parents, to say it's okay. I all through my thoughts and prayers along in this process, God has constantly reminded me of a period of time, a season of life, many, many years ago, when all my children were very young, when he came to me very individually about my children and wanted me to give them their lives. He wanted me to give him their lives. And that was I remember the experience was very, very scary. We have this idea that when we give something over to God, that he's going to just take it away or take it from us. And, just to be clear, in that time of fear and trepidation on my part before God's request, God, the Father, was so gentle. There was a tangible comfort that came to me. It was in word, but it was a presence as well. And, the Lord was very empathetic with me at that time, especially when he first did it with Noah's life. And that was the most troubling for me. After that, when he came to me over each child, it was familiar to me because God had already required it with Noah's life. But for Noah, it was a very, very difficult, that was really hard as a parent. And that experience was very traumatic. But what's interesting is that God knew the trauma. That's why I said he empathized. And so his words were comforting in a very tangible way. And he said, in essence, Tim, my son, don't you know that I love him, your child, more than you do? So that was definitely comfort. I can still remember literally trembling before God when I handed him my child. That was a very tough experience. But here's the thing, guys, that wasn't even, in the real world. It was all in the heart and all in the mind, and so looking back on that, that very much, and I want for any parent that ever hears this to understand that is a cultural resistance there. It's something about how we think about our family and how we should raise our children that is the real barrier there. God knows that. He's not blind to that. And so let's just clarify that what we are doing here is primarily about overcoming and building upon that transition. Okay. Academics will follow. The arts and the things that our children learn will follow that transition. But we can know that when they follow that transition, that they will be in the order that God has set forth for his people. So back to the question, well, how do we do this practically? Well, that's what we're going to begin to do. We're going to very practically engage with our children's lives with this perspective. It must include others. It must include the wisdom perspective that others have at different places in their life. Elaine, that's very valuable coming from you. Of course, it's very valuable coming from Emmanuel's position in life and age and experience with the Lord. Those are things that must be conveyed. They have to be passed on from generation to generation. From a very young child, my dad was very careful to instill in me the wisdom from learning from others, and specifically from the critical perspective of others, not a destructive criticism, but someone else that can look upon your life and you can receive the benefit of their instruction. That's huge. And as a parent, when we think that we hold the only grasp on that for our children, we are the ones that are harming our children. We are the ones that are withholding something good from our children. And further, that expands into something that is definitive of the house of God, and the melting away of the humanistic barriers of the familiar spirit within the context of family. And this is so important for the building up of God's house. We don't realize that what we're dealing with is not just our own children, that what we are dealing with is the way that God wants to build his church, the way that God wants his people to know one another, the way that God wants the young ones in that arena of relationships to be raised. We are not just touching our own family lives here. And we need to also recognize, and I'll kind of try to tie up with this a little bit, but we need to recognize that this is not just symbolic. It is a direct declaration by action in the heavenly realms when we begin to act in this way. So let's not be fearful that we don't have every hour and moment and exercise planned out at this moment. The key that has been expressed, through some discernment through Brother Emmanuel has been, now is the time. We've got to take the steps. And I believe that God is going to, he is going to be graceful to us in the measure that he gives us to walk it out. The first thing is to overcome the barriers that are resisting all around us to even get it started. So here we are, and we're excited about that. I think that as we continue, we will have further discussions about the things the Lord is opening along this line. But I know that we've communicated, not in great detail, but we've communicated with the kids about this. We plan to do that again today, just to give further details that we come out, from this discussion. But we've give them some general idea of, hey, here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it. And hopefully that can be a testimony to others around us, like Ben and Cheryl, for the upcoming low children, and for any others that the Lord brings along in the meantime. So I know that's a broad stroke, but that has been the gist of the discussion that we have had that I've had with Brother Emmanuel, with Sister Elaine, and also with Rachel. So
that's beautiful, brother. Thank you. Yeah.